what is EagleTalks? EagleTalks is a TED-style student organization dedicated to inspiring the Cobra community with the medium of public speaking. Last year, it was exactly in this room where 3 senior CGA students, in fact, did one EagleTalk themed on the courage to overcome. And the speakers in that event shared about their mental barricades caused by some unpleasant experiences and how they overcame these mental barricades. This February, we did our second event themed Seeing the Life Through Change. In that event, we invited 4 speakers to talk about some of the events and things in their life that became the turning points of their whole career or their family and their whole life. And that was a very successful event in which a lot of people were inspired by the speeches, and all the speakers were very happy to share their experiences, and which is why we decided to do a third one in April right now. So today we're talking about something very different from the last 2 times. Today, we're talking about diversity. Many of you hear about diversity a lot at Cobra, right? We have wonderful diversity programming here at Cobra. We have our diversity council, our diversity unit meetings, everything like that. But sometimes it's also very important for us to really think about diversity's value to a community, right? What does it really bring to a community? Of course, you have people looking different, people with different experiences, and people who come from different places, but why does it really matter? Why does it matter that you're from China, I'm from the United States, he's from France, or he's from Italy? Why does it really matter, all these related differences? Today, we'll be talking about diversity in the context of a French philosopher named René Descartes. If you're in AP Euro, you might have learned about him, and he is the pioneer of a school of philosophy named idealism. Idealism is the idea that the reality is shaped by both materials and the physical reality itself and one's mind. Which means that the things that you think, right, your mindset, can have a power to affect the reality that you perceive yourself through your own eyes. A better way to think about Cartesian dualism is through this very famous story named The Blind Man and the Elephant, right? You got these blind people right here, they're touching this elephant, and this guy's touching his tail, so he thinks it's a rope. This guy's touching his trunk, so he thinks that the elephant is a tree. Diversity is all about this, right? Our own perspective and our culture shapes how we look at the world. It changes how we perceive the reality, and sometimes disasters can happen if these realities that different people perceive contradicts with each other. So today, EagleTalks will be arguing in the context of Cartesian dualism that every single person sees the world through a set of lenses forged by where they come from, their cultures, and their origin. And diversity is to bring together these lenses and make good the society wisdom. So you're probably all bored listening to me talk, so we will invite our first speaker up to the stage to share about her story today. I know her from my junior year ethics class, and she really impressed me as being one of the kindest and the nicest persons I know. And at the Happiness in the World discussions, she's always really brave to stand up and stand up for what she believes in from her culture or how she was raised as a person. And many of you might know that she is an international student. She's from France. But many of us might not know that she, in fact, comes from a background that is forged by 3 cultures that you guys might not know. Everybody, please welcome Estelle Beignet.
Hello, thank you so much, Steve. My name is Estelle Beignet, and I'm a 2-year junior in Benson. And today I'm going to be talking about 3 cultures that make me one. So the 3 places that I'm going to be discussing today is Paris, the United States, and Alsace. So if you don't know where Alsace is on the map, I really don't blame you. It's on the northeast of France, and it's bordered with Germany. Both my grandparents on my dad's side were from this region. It has a very interesting history because it has been under French and German control over 5 times since 1681. So a little bit more about how I'm connected to Alsace. So these are actually documents from my family. My grandfather's brother actually, he was Alsatian, and during the Second World War, when Germany was occupying the northern part of France, they actually forced all the Alsatians to fight against the Russians. And they were called, the Maguilenu, and he was actually injured during battle and then brought back to Alsace. So on the left is a picture of the traditional clothing that Alsatians wore back in the time. A little bit more about how I'm connected to Alsace. So Estelle is actually my grandmother's name. She passed away a little bit before I was born, and it's a name that has been in my family for generations. Alsace is very unique. It has a lot of its own traditions, and it speaks a dialect called Alsatian that is very unique to this region. It's kind of like a mix of German and French that both my father and his brothers speak. So this is Saverne. This is the town that I grew up knowing when I visited my grandfather. They have a very really cute Christmas markets, and they have really good food, and their architecture is different from the rest of France because they have a lot of wood in their buildings. So to recap, Saverne and Alsace really kind of brings me an idea of where one part of my family comes from and kind of my roots. So the next place that really impacted me as a person is Paris. I was born and raised in Paris. All of these pictures except one are pictures that I took over the summer in quarantine. This is actually a picture that I took out of the window of my apartment. I really think that Paris is really beautiful, and it's a very interesting place too because it has a lot of history, museums, and it's a very alive city. There's always something to do. So when I first came to the United States, or when I started growing up and going to camp or to Culver, a lot of people had a lot of questions about France, and they had a lot of stereotypes. Now some of these are true, but some of these are wrong, and I think there's also a lot more to France than just stereotypes. So for example, some major differences with France and the United States is that there's a lot of strikes in France. In the United States, there are some strikes, but it's nothing compared to France. This is actually a picture that is taken really close to where I live, and there's constantly protests. Maybe it's a little different in COVID time, for example, a little bit before COVID, there was this movement called Yellow Jacket, and they protested every single Saturday against raising taxes and other French problems against the government. And I think this is partly due to, because France is such an old country, it deals really hardly with change. So another difference is education. So there are a lot of differences in the French education versus the American education, but here are some differences. So in high school, there's actually only 3 years of high school, and in the United States, there's 4. I think one of the major differences in the French system is that everybody is kind of expected to be at the same standard. So that means that there's no AP classes, there's no honors classes, there's no advanced classes. Everybody, every single year, is kind of paired with 30 students, and they go to every single class together. So it's very different than here. And then kind of about social norms. So these are all my friends, and this is a picture that I took while I was walking in France with my friend, and I was taking pictures. And this man who was selling books on the side of the Seine, which is a river that goes through Paris, asked if he wanted to have a picture, and we talked, and he was actually very friendly. Now, this is not very usual. France has a very kind of reserved culture, and they're not very that open to meeting strangers at first. For example, when you walk down the street, people don't usually say hi. But once you get to know people, they're actually very nice. So if you live in different countries, The relationships that you build are sometimes different, the expectations that you get in a friendship, etc. And then something that's also interesting about social norms in France is that the youth, the language in the youth is kind of very different than the ones that are used by adults. We have a lot of slangs or words that we inverse. So for example, thank you. Sometimes in French you would say you thanks. So for example, that'd be like merci or si me. A few other differences in the French system that I've noticed. I think in France it's more of an adult world where every children is kind of expected to follow the rhythm of the adults. So for example, we eat a lot later. We eat around like 8 or 9 p.m. There's less places that are just designed for kids. There's no like kids menu or places where kids could play like at a restaurant or something like that. I think the government also helps, offers a lot of security. So for example, free healthcare or the choice of education that is also free or very low compared to the United States. Another benefit of living in Europe is traveling, and it's a lot more easier to travel to different countries and cultures because everything is so much closer than in the United States, where if you're going to like state to state, it's a little bit harder, or you see like you're still in the United States. And then finally, the last place that impacted me and that gave me culture was my mom. And she was born in the United States, she's American, and she graduated from Culver in 1987. And I always wanted to follow in her footsteps and learn more about the United States, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here. But coming to Culver a year ago, I definitely did find challenges. I had a little bit of language barriers and had to get used to the different schedules. So in conclusion, coming from 3 different cultures, I definitely learned that every place has a story and that Culver is extremely diverse. And so I encourage you, if you have a friend from a different place or country, to ask them where they're from, how is it like. You may gain knowledge or another perspective. So yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Lily and I'm here to introduce the next speaker this evening. And I took notes on my phone because I'm not good on the spot. So I'm here to introduce the next speaker. I met this girl last year when she was a timid new sophomore and we became teammates on the softball team. I've since had the privilege to watch this girl grow into the amazing young woman and leader that she is today. This girl is the sweetest and most selfless individual that I know, and I cannot wait to hear her insights on the confidence gap between men and women in STEM. Everyone, please welcome Allie Baird.
How confident would you say you are on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, how confident would you be if I placed you in a math or science classroom? I know for me, that number drops significantly. And if you said the same thing, you're not alone. You might be a victim of the confidence gap. Hi, I'm Allie Baird, a 2-year junior from Ithaca Dorm, and I'm here today to talk about the confidence gap between men and women and how it affects women in STEM. I'm going to be talking about my experience as well as how and why this happens and what we can do about it. I grew up with 2 brothers. They're twins and 2 years older than me. And because we're so close in age, we did the same things, played the same sports, and we're each other's built-in playmates. And because they're older than me, I always thought that they were super cool. So, like any annoying younger sibling would, I followed them around and I did exactly what they did. And in simple terms, I grew up a tomboy. I wore basketball shorts and sweatshirts to school every day. I hated makeup and dolls and the color pink, and I hung out with a lot of guys in school. But things started to change around 6th and 7th grade, when instead of wanting to be myself, I wanted to be pretty. I felt the confidence in my masculine personality plummet as I grew insecure of myself, not only physically, but mentally. And I looked around at the guys in my grade and the guys that I was friends with, and I only saw their confidence rise. And it was terrifying to me. I thought I was alone. But it turns out that I wasn't alone. Because between the ages of 12 and 13, boys' confidence soars, leaving them 27% more confident than girls their age. Even if these girls weren't tomboys exploring their femininity for the first time like I was, they're at an age where they start seeing the pressure to look and act perfect coming from all directions. Between the ages of 12 and 13, the percentage of girls who say they're not allowed to fail increases by 150%, and 3 in 4 teenage girls worry about failing, and I am one of them. So, why does this happen? One of the reasons for this confidence gap is because young girls are shielded from making mistakes in comparison to boys the same age, which has a lot of negative consequences later in life, like how girls respond to feedback. Girls are much more likely to negatively respond to feedback than boys are, and think that this failure is a direct result of their intelligence. On the other hand, guys respond to feedback much more positively, and they use it to better themselves, and they think it isn't a direct correlation to their ability, but rather a fixable issue. So, young girls grow up terrified of failure. The second reason why this happens is called the stereotype effect. And if you don't know what this stereotype is, it says that girls are inherently worse at math and science related subjects than boys are, and that they underperform in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, if a girl believes in this stereotype, she is much more likely to see a failed test grade or a missed problem as a direct result of her ability, and she'll learn to believe this stereotype. And she'll know and she'll believe that the boy sitting next to her will always be better than her in this math or science classroom. And even if a girl doesn't believe in these stereotypes, it's one that can cause a lot of stress and pressure in their academic career, and it can even make them feel like they don't belong in that math or science classroom. And if a girl is confident in her math and science ability, it makes her so terrified of failure because she's so determined to beat the odds and succeed that she feels like she can't mess up. And she's held back from releasing her true potential in fear that if she makes one mistake, she'll be seen as she's not supposed to be there, or she's not like able to be in that society at all. So, I've experienced this confidence gap not only in myself, but in many others around me, especially in the language that's used in the classroom. If I'm sitting in math class and the guy sitting next to me asks me what I got for a question, I'm much more likely to say, I got this answer, which I think is right, but I'm not really sure, so just let me know what you got when you get the answer, please. Or, if we got different answers for a question, I'd be much more likely to say, I know I'm probably the one that's wrong, but like let me know what you did because I'm sure I messed up somewhere, so just like let me know. And how unconfident does that sound? And at first, I thought it was just my low confidence when it comes to math, until I started looking around. And I noticed that the girls in my classes are much more likely to be unsure or unconfident of themselves in comparison to guys. So, this is a direct correlation to the confidence gap, which makes more than 3 times as many high school boys believe they would be successful in a STEM career as high school girls. So what can we do about it? And what did I do about it? Once I noticed that this was happening and that this was an issue, I immediately wanted to change it. I was in my classes and I noticed that these incredibly smart and incredibly talented girls were not speaking up in class, and they were not sharing their intelligence with the rest of the world, and I thought that they really needed to. And then I started to realize that I was one of these girls too, and I was holding myself back. So I took the pit of fear in my stomach that happens when you want to raise your hand or talk in class, and I used it to encourage me, and I acted in spite of this fear. And I raised my hand, and I answered the question, and I gave my opinion. And I noticed that after one girl gives their opinion, multiple will follow through. And that if I were to share my answers and my experience, that it would make other girls feel much more comfortable to share theirs as well. I acted not for myself, but for others in this situation, and I took the fear in my stomach and I pursued in spite of it, and I noticed that I made a great difference in the classroom. And Russ Harris puts this perfectly in his quotation when he says that genuine confidence is not the absence of fear, but rather a transformed relationship with fear. When guys have this fear in their stomach when they go to try something new, they're encouraged to keep going despite of this fear and to act in spite of it, and they're encouraged to ignore it. And that is why they grow up so much less afraid of failure than girls. And girls, we're told to listen to it. We're told to let it happen and to let it stop us from reaching our true potential. So what you have to do and what you have to realize is that the fear is never going to go away. You have to learn to listen to it, but to not let it stop you from trying and from raising your voice and from speaking up in class. So the first thing you can do is to alter your relationship with fear. Know that it will always be present, but that you should act in spite of it. And you should not let it stop you from trying or from speaking up or sharing your thoughts in class. And the second thing you should do is to never let your self-doubt control you. I know it can be terrifying to speak up or say anything in class. I know, trust me. But failure is inevitable, and you have to know that failure only brings you successes, that you can only learn from your failure. And do not let that stop you from trying. Third, remember to embrace your femininity in the classroom. You don't have to diminish yourself or your abilities because of your gender. You don't have to let society tell you what you can and can't do, especially when it comes to your education. And last, remember to celebrate the women around you. I know that there can be such an underrepresentation of women in STEM that it feels like you have to compete with the women in your class in order to feel like you belong or you deserve that spot to be there. But I promise you that their intelligence does not undermine your ability, and that you need to uplift them and you need to stand with them and not against them, because you together are defeating the odds. And to everyone in this room, education is power. Do not let society tell you what you can and can't do, and do not let it stop you from getting the education you deserve. Education is a weapon in your hand, and I hope you all use it. Thank you.
Yeah, no one was looking at it. Alright, so that was a very inspiring speech about education. Now I hope you learned more about how you should treat your schoolwork and how you should work on your confidence in classroom. And the next person that we have for you, while they do that, is a person who demonstrates perfect confidence, okay? He's the person whose name we all know at Culver, right? He's doing his thing. He's the former Reg Comp, and he is one of the best coxswains on the Culver rowing team. A fun story about me and him. I didn't know him so much before junior year, but last week he coxed my 2K on the rowing team, and then I threw up a little bit in my mouth at the 3500, and I swallowed it back in, right? I was ready to give it up. Come on, like I threw up. I was ready to give it up. But this guy kept pushing me so that I had to finish. That experience did kind of add a little bit of intimacy to me and him. You know, help me learn more about this guy right here. But today you'll be learning something about his experience from a different perspective, right? Many of you might know that Noah Tan is a music genius, and this kid literally wrote a musical as a high school student. So today, he'll be talking to us about his experiences with music, with composition, and what about music makes a person emotional. All right?
You can sit there.
Thank you, Stephen. I just want to start out this presentation with a very simple question. What about music makes people cry? We are talking in this EagleTalks about perception. And what do you perceive about music that makes you want to cry or makes you want to feel sad? Why does this scene make you sad? This or maybe even this? Why does that make you sad? You can say to yourself, well, maybe it's death. Mufasa is dying. Or poor Rose. I don't know the other guy, I'm just saying, but poor Rose. So maybe you could say it's death, but then in that case, why does that make you sad? But this makes you a little bit less sad. Well, it really can be applied to anything. What about music makes people blank? It could be what makes people laugh, happy, angry. You see, this is a concept that I was obsessed with. What about music makes people blank? And I got obsessed with the concept of struggle. But not only struggle, but struggle enter relationship with triumph. And so, one event that I really resonated with, even though I wasn't alive at the time, was 9/11. And it wasn't because of just the horrific events of it, but how composers as a community came together to create a community where we can heal. A composer by the name of John Adams wrote a piece called On the Transmigration of Souls. And that was a response to the attacks on 9/11. And in this piece, he created a community, a space in which we could come together, find this common principle of grief, of struggle, but also use that as a catalyst for healing. And so I was obsessed with this. What about this piece made me feel grief, but at the same time made me feel closure, knowing that I can move on? And so this is why I became a composer. It's how do you write music like this? What about music makes people feel the way they feel? Well, I'm going to give you 4 steps today. Step 1, find inspiration, right? You can't write music unless you're inspired, right? So there's 4 main things that I feel inspires people. 1, the human condition. What makes us human? Secondly, life experiences. I wrote a piece recently called Fanfare and Celebration. And that was about my time as a Culver Military Academy cadet. I also wrote Culver the Musical as an experience on my time as a cadet. I struggled in the military system my first few weeks. I was the kid that would stand under the darkest spot in the room because my shoes were not shiny and I didn't want it to get gaped. But I took that and I used that as a way to transform my life into something that I can say I'm very proud to say that I've developed over the 4 years. Thirdly, messages that you want to convey as a composer. These messages are so powerful. I have a firm belief that music is not just constrained to purely incidental music. They can be used as a catalyst for change. And finally, musical personification. How do we use music to represent something else? Secondly, I map my thinking. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say we have a beginning of the piece, and let's say we have the end of the piece. All right, well, you can say, this is time, all right? And we can say, okay, from the beginning and the end, I want to map out the central motivic line. What does my melody want to sound like? All right, so I'll map that out. I'll do my thing. And I'll say, okay, secondly, tension. How tense do I want my piece to be? Right? There's a difference between this kind of weird, very major, very release chord versus maybe it's kind of feel uneasy. Thirdly, textural density, right? Let's take Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, for example. The difference between versus and finally, the strength of tonality. And what I mean by that is home base. What makes you feel home? Let's take Twinkle Twinkle Little Star again. Right? There. Now I'm home. Versus elements are what I use to construct a piece. Step 3, I organize my materials. Right? There's different things you can do. Right? You have your main melody. Right? Let's say I play a flute. I'll say, okay, here's my main melody. But that's not just it, or else that's just, very boring. Right? So I'll say, okay, I'll write out my other instruments, and step 4, I'll just write. So you see here, we have our main line. We might have a counter melody, something that interacts with the melody, something that's almost like a conversation. We might have a running passage up here. We might say, okay, I want this to feel more motion, right? Or we might have something ornamental. Here, I just want this to be a nice little bow on the top of this music. And then we have the bass line. This is what grounds the piece. This is what makes the main tonality of the piece. You put that all together, these are just elements that you are using to construct your creativity, right? So that's something. Right? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Right? Yeah? And so I have a firm belief that music composition is not some kind of esoteric, weird, creative genius that you wake up at 2 o'clock and it can be, but it's not something that you kind of just wake up and you're like, oh, I've got this genius. No, music composition is like tools in a toolbox, right? You have your melody, right? You have maybe a rhythm. You have dynamics. Is it loud? Is it soft? Is it kind of soft, kind of loud? And then you have instrumentation. What instruments are playing this piece? And you could be thinking of yourself, well, that's, kind of simple. You might be thinking to yourself, no, that toolbox is lame, right? Such simple stuff. Anyone could do it. What makes it so special? But I would say to you, well, maybe more height representative, I would say to you, well, wait a minute. If our toolbox is so simple, solution, just get a bigger toolbox, right? So instead of just having melody, we'll have advanced harmony, right? We'll have things like textural and density, right? How thick is the music? We'll have things like tension. What makes it? Does it make you sit up on the edge of your chair, or does it make you kind of sit back? And finally, tonality, right? How eerie does it feel? Do you feel like you're going to home base? So let's start with the melody and a rhythm, right? To start, all right? And then you can say, well, let's add a simple harmony. We know generally majors, happy, minor, sad, right? Right? Major, happy, minor, sad. Okay, well, let's add some chords in, right? Some instrumentation to it, right? So we have our violin, and we'll have a piano, right? What are we doing? What are these different combinations that we're using? So let's put it all together. It's not something that you need to spend, developing your craft. Yes, it takes years of experience, but what pops in the head, what we call creative genius, what just pops up into our head at 2 a.m. is just these tools in the toolbox and how composers use their creativity to combine these different tools. Let's put it all together. No practice, no music, just tools in a toolbox and feeling what we feel. Right? Let's give it a try. Using that same melody. Sadness, right? Minor. intensity. What instruments are playing? We have this big, bold melody now with accompaniment. But what if you just take the same thing and turn it into this? Struggle is inevitable. Emotion is inevitable. But with every struggle comes the opportunity to triumph. That was some wonderful music for the night. Thank you, Noah, for the presentation. Let's give Noah another round of applause. Now, we have Mr. Trevathan here, speaking for another student organization, Spectrum, which represents the LGBT community at Colbert. Mr. Trevathan, go ahead and make your announcement, and then after he makes the announcement, we'll have a 2-minute stretch break for y'all, okay? So you can just go to the bathroom or stretch, and then after the stretch break, we have another 3 speeches about Native American heritage, about an ear of corn, and Bitcoin for y'all, okay? Go ahead.
I really am just an announcement, but we thought we would have some crossover with an audience gathered to listen to speeches on diversity. Spectrum is having the great Katie Barnes, class of '09, zoom in from her home in Connecticut, sitting out on the lanai and talking to us about orientation, identity, and if we want to, she is also a writer for ESPN, so we could just talk about writing about sports. That'll be at 3:30. If you want to come gather as a group, we are taking the forum in the library, the glassed-in classroom. If you'd rather watch in your room, send me an email. I'll send you a Zoom invite and you can get in on the Zoom meeting. But again, that's 3:30 with Katie Barnes on Sunday.
All right. Thank you, Mr. T. So, 2 minutes, go ahead, do whatever you want, and then we'll come back. All right?